Burial Ground National Monument. I want to thank our delegation and specifically Congressman Nadler, Maloney, Meeks, Jeffries, Meng, and Espaillat for their leadership, for their partnership, and their dedication to preserving and honoring this important historic site. The African Burial Ground is our nation's earliest and largest known African American cemetery. This is the final resting place of more than 15,000 enslaved Africans and early generation African Americans whose forced labor laid the foundation for our city and our state. They built the fort, the mill, and the stone houses the first colonists lived in. They cleared land for farms and for docks. They widened roads like Broadway for wagons and built the wall that Wall Street is named after. Yet for hundreds of years, this burial site and the people and knowledge buried within it were hidden. When the burial ground was rediscovered, it changed our understanding of New York's history of enslavement. The rediscovery of this site, considered one of the most important archaeological finds of our time, reminded us that we have so much left to learn and to understand about the history of our country and the history and legacy of enslavement. To truly honor the people who rest here, we must commit to continue that learning. That is why we are reintroducing our legislation to expand on the existing site and create the African Burial Ground International Memorial Museum and Education Center, a permanent living memorial to the enslaved people buried here. The museum would create a new venue where we can grow our understanding of the true history of our nation, our state, and of the institution of slavery in the United States and around the world. At this moment in time when we are having a reckoning as a country on the injustices and inequalities the African American and Black communities have been subjected to from the earliest days of our nation today, this museum and educational center could not be more important. It would house a collection of exhibits, artifacts, and documents unlike any other anthropological and symbolic site in the United States or in the world. It would also provide a place to share findings of research done on DNA samples from preserved human remains to trace the home and ancestral countries of the individuals buried at the African Burial Ground. And it would allow us to examine and celebrate the cultural traditions enslaved peoples brought with them from Africa and maintained despite generations of unthinkable hardship and oppression. This knowledge will help us to paint a fuller and more accurate picture of people that were here and to recognize that their lives mattered. This museum would serve as a sister to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. It would host complementary exhibits and foster collaboration between the two museums as well as other museums, historically Black colleges and universities, historical societies and educational institutions, creating a stronger network of groups focused on strengthening our understanding of this chapter of our history. I'm proud to work on the African Burial Ground International Memorial Museum and Educational Center Act with Representative Nadler, who sponsors the bill in the House, and with our co-sponsors, Representatives Maloney, Meeks, Jeffries, Meng, and Espaillat, and many of our New York City delegation colleagues. Together, we will continue to push for the creation of this museum. Now I'll turn it over to Congressman Nadler.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for championing this issue for so many years in the Senate. I am proud today to reintroduce this legislation in the House along with Representatives Maloney, Meeks, Kim Jeffries, Grace Meng, and Adriana Espaillat. I'm incredibly grateful that they have joined us today at this sacred site. As Senator Gillibrand so eloquently stated, the African Burial Ground is a site of profound cultural, historic, and spiritual significance, and is an integral part of the American story. The National Park Service is our national storyteller, preserving, protecting, and sharing our collective American history for future generations. It is vital that the stories told and the narratives shared reflect all of those who have been part of our collective national experience. However, we have lost sight of the need for a world-class museum, education, and research center. And that's why we must pass this legislation. As a nation, we must never forget the immense trials and tribulations fixed during the ongoing fight for equality and justice. The museum is needed to tell the untold stories of those who helped build New York City and shed light on their perseverance and strength of character in the face of unbearable hardships, discrimination, and of course exploitation. We cannot successfully fight for equality without a clear understanding of the history of slavery in this country. The development of a shared history is not spontaneous. It takes work, dedication, and reflects those who write it. Every day there is new research and new understandings of our history, particularly the history of those most marginalized during their time, that deepens, enriches, and enlivens the great tapestry that is our history. It is time we put intent behind the effort to guide and tell the stories here. It's no coincidence that the legislature includes the word international in the title of the Museum and Educational Center. Slavery was a worldwide institution during colonial times, and sadly still has not been eradicated in all parts of the world. I hope that in addition to being a place of mourning and respect, a museum will serve as a beacon of freedom and hope against slavery today in all its forms. I want to thank Senator Gillibrand and my colleagues in the House again for being here today. I look forward to seeing this important legislation passed into law. And now it's my privilege to introduce Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Kirsten. We are here at a really sacred site. It is a city national monument. It is a national monument for a historic site, and it is considered the most important archaeological find of the 21st century. We are here to remember, and establishing the African Burial Ground Memorial Museum and Education Center is critical to ensuring that the individuals brought here in bondage who fought against incredible adversity are given the recognition and respect that they deserve.
Thank you, Carolyn, Senator Jerry, all of my colleagues. This is somewhat emotional. This burial ground, and why we're here, this piece of legislation. I planned to say other remarks, but when I got here, I could feel the souls of those buried here. I could hear echoing in my head their joy of us being here and making sure that their legacy lives. I'm a little emotional because when I think what this means for generations yet unborn, how we are keeping that history. I'm reliving in my own head my visits to Ghana and to the door of no return. And I had my hand on the walls of those forts where they kept human beings like animals and forced them on that ship to America. I'm full of emotion on the day that we see continuing in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the trial of George Floyd. I'm full with joy because just 5 minutes ago, my second daughter had another baby. And I'm thinking of this burial ground and the connection to why she could be today. Because if it wasn't for those brave souls that were able to withstand the Middle Passage and then deal with all of the racism, the enslavement, the Jim Crow-ism, that existed in this country, if they couldn't maintain and succeed, my second grandchild could not be here, I would not be here. Thank you very much, Senator Gillibrand and Chairman Nadler, for your tremendous leadership with respect to this incredibly important initiative that will respect the life and the legacy of the 15,000 plus remains of those enslaved Africans who helped to build our great city, our great state, and our great nation. I'm thankful for all of my colleagues who are supporting this initiative within the New York delegation and beyond. We are standing on hallowed ground. We are standing on sacred ground. We are standing in a historic place that reveals the realities of our nation and its journey. We've come a long way as a country. We still have a long way to go. But you cannot tell the true American story without lifting up and recognizing the sacrifice, the pain, the suffering, and the death that enslaved Africans endured during the kidnap, during the Middle Passage, and upon their arrival here in New York City and in other parts of the country.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng from Queens, New York. Thank you, Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Jerry Nadler, for sponsoring this incredibly important and meaningful piece of legislation, and for reintroducing this critical bill to honor the remains of an estimated tens of thousands of enslaved Africans and early generation African Americans from the colonial era. I am so proud to be a co-sponsor of this measure and will do everything I can to ensure its passage and enactment into law. America was founded on a broken dream and promise of equality and justice for all. The painful history of slavery and violence against African Americans shocks the conscience, but it requires us to have clear vision and resolve on how to honor the past. Slowly but steadily, we are taking proper steps to memorialize such sacred and hallowed places, which must always be provided with the recognition, respect, and honor it deserves. This bill is critical to ensuring we pay our respects to those who built our city and our nation. We owe it to them and this country to ensure that future generations of Americans know of our painful and sad history. As a kid who grew up in New York City and America, we have not learned enough about our true and complete history in our textbooks. And this is a huge part of making sure that we right that wrong. And by knowing this, we can create a stronger society that recognizes its past. I thank all my colleagues for being here today, and I look forward to this bill becoming law so that we can honor the men and women whose final resting place is right here and an integral part of our American history. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Adriana Espaillat.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Jerry, for your leadership. I am happy to be associated with this initiative. You know, part of the horrible institution of slavery was an effort to keep those held in bondage anonymous by even stripping them of their identity and keeping them forever anonymous and disconnected with their origins and their past. Several years back, we were working on a school all the way in the northern tip of Manhattan, PS 98. And we found that the parking lot there was also a slave burial ground. So there are slave burial grounds all over the city of New York. And we often hear the term that our country was built on the back of slaves. So we are here to break with the effort to keep the identity of those in bondage anonymous, to give them a proper and holy and solemn place in our city, but in the history also of our nation. And I'm happy to be associated with this effort. Finally, I visited a historical site in the northern part of Manhattan. And there, in that historical site that tourists often go to, there was a family tree of the folks that way back in the day owned that property. And in it, it said, young female slave, with no name, anonymous. So the effort to keep those in bondage anonymous was rampant across America and this city. This site will give everyone an identity, and it will unmask the horrible institution of slavery. Thank you.